Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Contractor Evolution. My guest on the show today is Greg McKeown. He's the author of Essentialism, The Disciplined Pursuit of Less. Now, this book is a cult classic in the small business world because of its refreshingly simple philosophy to productivity and success. And this is an extremely timely conversation for us because as we're heading into the new year, it reinforces a theme we've been talking about for a while on the show. Learning to say no, reducing distractions, and tunnel visioning in on the few key things that our business truly needs. As you set your goals, build your strategies, and get excited about 2025 and beyond, I hope this conversation helps you prioritize the vital few from the trivial many. So let's dive in with Greg. You're watching Contractor Evolution, the podcast by Breakthrough Academy, where we systemize contracting businesses for growth. Keep watching to learn how the world's top contractors scale their companies, build killer teams, and make more while working less. Greg McKeown, welcome to Contractor Evolution. It's really good to have you.
It's so great to be with you. Thank you.
I got tipped off to this book by two people a few years ago. One is a founder of a really cool software platform called JobNimbus. His name is Ben Hodson. Built a whole bunch of really cool companies. I really admire the guy, and he was like, "You have to read this book." And then I also heard it I heard it mentioned on the Chris Williamson podcast like a week later. And I was like, I got to get onto this book. So I've read it. A lot of our audience has too. I want to ask you, your book came out in 2014. It's the end of 2024. We're moving into 2025. Have you thought about the way the world has changed in the last 10 years? You kind of think about 2014, you get a mental image. It seemed so innocent, naive, like young compared to where we are right now. How has Essentialism, the book, and the overarching philosophy that you talk about, how has its relevance changed in the last decade?
We just came out with a 10-year anniversary edition of Essentialism. And as I was writing the new preface for that, I had a chance to reflect on just what you're asking. And one of the important shifts is I think we've gone from an information age to an influencer age. And if the primary characteristic of the information age is distraction, then the primary distinction and characteristic of the influencer age is disorientation. And that's like a sea change in my view. And sea change is sort of got a double meaning to it because disorientation is about noise, and noise comes from the Latin nausea, which comes from the Greek, which means seasickness. And so this sense of noise that we are just buried in and trying to orient ourselves with seems to me to be the primary shift over that 10 years.
For the unacquainted listener, can you give I've cherry-picked sort of certain sections, chapters, thoughts from the book that I want to go deeper on. But I'm sure you've been asked this 1,000 times, but for the unacquainted listener, what's like the very quick version, the TLDR version of Essentialism?
Essentialism is an antidote to the problem of the undisciplined pursuit of more. So it's the feeling that you're stretched too thin, you're going in too many different directions, you feel busy but not necessarily productive, you're constantly going but not really feeling like you're taking, for example, your business to the next level. And so the antidote is the disciplined pursuit of less.
And at the beginning here, can you talk, you've just released this Essentialism planner, which is sort of a more tactile, interactive. I love these books. I'm such a sucker for these things whenever they come. You like read the book and then like we have this like really cool guide that you can play around with and do drawings in and put your thoughts down and talk a little bit about that here at the beginning. And we're going to link it below too.
Well, it's a little like what you described, but there's more to it. So 10 years ago, I was under contract to create a kind of, hey, here's a spin-off product. If you like Essentialism, you're going to like this as you described it, tactile journal planner type thing. But as I got into it, and we had a team working on it as well, I just found after a couple of months, I don't think I have anything that's distinctive, that's different. And we have so many planners and so many journals. It's like, does the world really need another one of these things? And so I actually uncommitted from the contract and left it like that. Now, meanwhile, I am I don't know how you describe it. Like, I never miss a day writing in a journal / planner of my own making. I think it's like 14 years since I've missed a day. And so over that iterative process of teaching in, more than 400 different organizations over that decade, I sort of came to the point where I thought, I think I have something now that really helps. And I was also convinced by this point that people needed more than the mindset. So the book is the mindset. Essentialism is a mindset. And I thought that would be enough originally. But over time, I thought, no, having a tool set to go with it makes a difference. Having something that is effortless to use so that each day when we wake up, that moment, we all wake up with like 2 seconds of peace before the noise hits us. And then if we're not careful, from the moment that noise hits us to the moment that we lie down at night, the noise is running us and we're reacting to it and we're trying to deal with it. And in one sense, that is just life. I mean, that's all of us. We just are dealing with chaos. But if you can find a system to help you deal with that chaos less reactively, more intentionally, more purposefully, then you can have a significant advantage. That's what the Essentialism Planner is designed to do. So it has, it's a 90-day experience, so it's one per quarter. You start with a personal quarterly offsite. It doesn't really have to be offsite, but it helps. Space to think strategically. And then there's a daily process to be able to deal with the noise, find the signal in that noise, and be able to therefore break through to the next level of your business, of your life, and without burning out.
So I was doing a reread on the Kindle this past week, and I was like kind of looking at the salient points, and I went through a few chapters again, and there was one line, and you did the way you titled every chapter I thought was really genius. There's one, chapter 3 is titled "Discern: The Unimportance of Practically Everything," and I kind of want to back into this question this way. Benji, have been thinking a lot about the idea of surface area. And okay, this is going to sound abstract. It's a very practical point. When you're like, I don't know what grade it was, grade 7, grade 8, you kind of learn these like very simplistic formulaic math equations for surface area, sort of height times width. And then there's one for a circle, which includes pi, r squared, whatever. I can't remember trigonometry, but we were taught this stuff at some point to calculate surface area of a shape. And I have noticed as just my life and my career advances, the idea, I've noticed a very felt sense of that surface area growing. Mm-hmm. And so here, I don't just like do this podcast, although this is like an extremely fun and rewarding part of what I get to do. I lead the content team and the brand here at Breakthrough Academy. We've gone from a very small team to a medium-sized team to an increasingly bigger team. Our budgets go up every year to spend more on paid ads, on a whole bunch of different stuff.
Yep, of course. I understand.
The surface area just keeps getting bigger. And by the way, it's not just a 2-dimensional surface area. It's not even a 3-dimensional surface area. It's like a 4-dimensional thing because you have to do all this through time and seasons, and it's complex. Now, the contractor example of this is they start a business and it's them and a helper, and then it's them and a couple helpers, and then it's a few crews, and then it's more crews than they can manage. So they add another layer of management. And now they have so many crews, they need a sales team to feed them, and they need a marketing team to feed the sales team. You get what I'm saying? The surface area, it's like this ever expanding thing. And it's very much a boiling of the frog. You don't notice it day to day. You really don't. You sort of notice it in these moments of clarity in your life where you're like, holy crap, I'm exhausted. And I know day to day that there's more things under my management than I'm able to manage. I know that I'm forgetting stuff all the time. Like that's like a very felt sense all the time. So this is a long preamble for the question, but you frame it so well. And I want you to kind of rehash a certain section of that chapter, which is give us, the listener, the busy contractor, landscaper, painter, whatever, in their truck listening right now, a practical guide to discerning the trivial many from the vital few.
Yeah, look, first of all, we get conned by the busy, in the sense that eventually we can't work out whether the things that we're doing actually are vital or trivial.
Right.
They're just happening to us. They're just hitting us. And one of the reasons for that, it's not the only reason, but one of the reasons is literally the creation of the phone. Evolutionarily, we pay attention to the things that are really close to us because that's the stuff that can kill us.
Right.
And so you really pay attention. So once we created a device that sits in the hand, there's this sense that whatever is happening here, that's important. That needs attention, even though there can be almost no relationship between that device and what actually matters. So look, what can you do? I mean, one of the reasons I ended up arguing for this idea of a personal quarterly offsite is because there are things you just can't notice in the moment to moment, email to email, appointment to appointment way of living. Mm-hmm. And so there's three main questions that people can ask. And I think this, of course, you don't have to actually go offsite. You don't have to take a full weekend to ask these questions. That's just an added advantage if you can create that kind of space. But here are the questions. What is essential that I'm underinvesting in? What's non-essential that I'm overinvesting in? And how can I make it effortless to make that trade-off? Now, there's more to the process than that. There are sub-questions, there are exercises that help to break that down into meaningful pieces, but that's the overarching set of questions. And of course, that's different for everyone. If you're an individual contractor, or rather you are doing the work yourself, okay, those questions are going to be different. But you might find as you're scaling the business, you might find yourself saying, my goodness, I'm underinvesting in finding somebody to do the back office work brilliantly, superbly, efficiently. I'm just not focused on that. And because that's not my strong suit, you just keep on doing it, not really realizing that there are people who love to do that work. And so at every transition period, which, by the way, I think happens, pretty continually if your business is growing, you want to be able to have a chance, I think once a quarter. I think you want to have every quarter of your business having a chance to say, where am I over and under investing? So that I can make those tweaks to get back on track. And that's a metaphor that I think is helpful here, is that a plane is off track 90% of the time. It arrives where it's supposed to arrive because it adjusts continually. And that's the idea of the Essentialism Planner. Yes, you're going to be off track. You're going to be off track many times. I am going to be. You are going to be. Everybody listening every day. The question isn't whether we get off track. The question is how quickly can we get back on track? And a tool to be able to help people do that, I think has the power of relevancy.
When you say the plane is off track 90% of the time, are you talking about like if you were to look at the flight map on a plane and you were to fast forward it, you would notice the plane is kind of always doing this the entire way from Dallas to Vancouver. Like it's sort of doing these little doot, 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 doot.
Correct.
If you're listening on audio, I'm kind of moving my hand in a bit of a zigzag pattern. But that's the idea, right? It's not, in other words, this is important. It's not as the crow flies. It's as the plane flies, which is doop, deep, right here, left, up, down, 15 degrees there, 30 degrees there, right, the whole way.
And there's a lot to pull from that metaphor, but one is that you need a reorienting system if you live in a disorienting world.
You can say that again, man. This is what I'm saying. I'm like, I find, and I don't know if I'm just like cognitively behind or slow, but I have to tell you, man, like trivial many, vital few. It's just such a great way to phrase the idea that there's a whole bunch of stuff that doesn't matter and very few that does. It's not obvious to me day to day which is which. I'm embarrassed to admit that on this podcast. It's not
I love
obvious.
That you're admitting it.
Right? Like hour to hour, I'll get something that hits my inbox, a Slack message, a ping, hey, can I talk to you about something? And I honestly, Greg, I'm like overwhelmed at how much time I have to spend not solving the ping, just deciding if this is something that demands my bandwidth or not. That's where most of it gets burnt. Isn't that crazy?
No. Yeah, it's not embarrassing though, because here's the thing. I think there are two kinds of people in the world right now. There are people who are lost, and there are people who know they are lost.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
So when I was growing up in England, there was a problem, which is that my father, when we would go on drives, was really directionally challenged.
Right.
So, and he was way better than my mother.
Not a strong directional family.
Yeah, I remember being in the back, like one of these, just one of these old cars. They didn't have enough seatbelts, and so I was one of five, youngest of five, and so I was always sort of thrown in the back of the car. Like, I mean, no seatbelt, no chair, and here's the thing: if you're lost and you know you're lost, you're not lost anymore. Because you can just stop, get directions. Don't pretend that you understand them if you don't. Get somebody to draw it. The second you're lost again, stop, get directions. Like, it's a very solvable problem if you admit you have the problem. My father used to say, he said, I just feel it's down here. And I became like, Inigo Montoya from the Princess Bride. Like, I don't think those words mean what you think they mean. Because I remember one time for hours trying to find where we were going. It was only like 10, 15 minutes away from our home where we were supposed to get to, but we never got there. And we literally went home. And of course, it was very intense and stressful for everybody. But you see, in that little story is like modern life. If you admit quickly, I don't know what's going on. This is all noise. It's all coming at me. There is a sort of perpetual chaos to be handled. And I don't know how to handle it. Then you actually start to know what to do. And that's what this daily process is that I have developed for my own sanity, to be able to survive this world, to thrive in it. Because the structure, and it's very different than other planning processes, it embeds the reality of our world into it. So there's sort of, the daily process has three parts to it. What, so what, now what? In the what, you are getting all that noise out of your head onto the page. So it's just free writing, because you can't figure that stuff out inside of your head. You have to look at it. You have to separate yourself from it. You have to get, let's say, the observer's advantage. And then with that advantage, you can start to connect the dots. And that's step two. So what? What does this mean for me? What's the headline of my life today based on all that noise? And then from that, you build the now what, which is what I call the 1, 2, 3 method. What is the priority today? That's number one. What are two things that are essential and urgent? And then three things that are maintenance items. So you can think about that. The priority is your project for the day. That's the one thing. The thing that hopefully you're going to be able to spend a couple of hours moving something forward. Something that is very unlikely to happen unless you prioritize it and focus on it. The urgent things, they're more likely to happen, but these are sort of like the taxes of our life. It's like, these things are coming at us. These are the key appointments. We are going to make them, but identifying them is still helpful. The three maintenance items are like the laundry of our life. That's the stuff that often we don't want to do and we don't think really matters because there's not an acute sense of either importance or urgency. But these are the things, if you don't do them, tomorrow and the next day feel a lot harder than they need to be. Those together, those items, if you add them up, the 1, 2, 3, that's 6 items. I think of that as the done for the day list. And so it doesn't mean that you have to be done. But if you do those 6 things, you have done something by definition that's very important and unlikely to happen. You've dealt with the urgent and essential things, and you've made your tomorrow self happy. So your tomorrow self will thank you. And this, to me, is like that flight plan because it helps you to come back through the day when things hit us. Okay, we try and deal with them, we try to make sense of them, but we have something to come back to. And I have found this to be a very helpful process. When I do it, I do better in my business, I do better in my life. When I don't do it, it becomes more frantic, more frenetic. And so it's an embedded way of handling the actual challenge of modern life.
This is a rhythmical organizing principle that you've applied to your life, sort of. Does it take you 5 minutes to do that, to write that list every day? Less? Like, is it a quick exercise?
It can be. I mean, there are times when I've done it sort of mentally, and that's not ideal. But you can, even the questions, you're just driving in the truck and you just, okay, what's happening? You're just sort of having a little conversation with yourself. What is happening right now? Okay, I got this stuff going on, that stuff going on. So there are very micro versions of it. Like if I were to give like best case, to try to work towards, I would describe it as like a power half an hour. And it's like this, like, I don't think anybody listening or watching this right now would feel, I could just take control of my whole life. Like I'm just going to everything. Because everybody answers to other people. Yeah. If you have family, if you're married, you answer to people. If you have a business, you answer to your customers. If you work for someone else, you answer to that company and to your manager. Everybody has responsibilities. But here's the idea. If you can take responsibility for half an hour, if you can take control of half an hour of your day, then you can impact positively every other minute of the other 23 and a half hours. So, whether someone does it in a few minutes, like literally 5 as you're suggesting, or takes the full half an hour, this has a very high return on effort, not just return on investment, but return on effort, ROE.
Now, there is I sense a fundamental prerequisite to the tactical day-to-day stuff here. And this is going to sound sort of so obvious and so basic, but I believe that there's more here than meets the eye. In order to, when I read your book, and you do talk about this, but I'm reminded of this, the importance of just to have an essentialist life. You do need to know what you want. You need to know what you want. Now, that is not as simple as it seems. And either times have changed and they've made it more complex, or it's just always been a more slippery question than it seems on the surface. So when I think of the 2025 sort of version, this is harder than it seems for a few reasons. We're just in extremely distracted times. You mentioned the phone. By the way, funny you mentioned like the phone. I'm literally reading Steve Jobs's Walter Isaacson's Steve Jobs bio. Amazing.
Right.
And I'm sort of learning about the thought processing and why they did things the way they did. And I can tell you that this was not the plan. This is not what he thought when he did the first original mock-ups of that, just as a quick aside.
Well, we should riff on it for a second because we won't get back to it. But that's absolutely right. I mean, of course, it wasn't an open app platform by design, because they just trusted their own apps only, and they wanted to make sure that they were done beautifully and put together. And so, I mean, of course, that thought changed, and was an enormous business advantage to Apple that they did change it, but they also helped to bring about something that was unintended. Not only, I mean, an app centric way of living is a bit of a beast.
It's a beast. It's a beast. And I don't think people on the business case, I don't think people know this. The Apple App Store takes 30% of all revenue that runs through it. Everything, just right off the top. A third. In-app purchases, buying music, everything, a third. So they couldn't help themselves. And here we are.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly right. That's what happened. But it's one of those situations where you create, of course, every advancement you create unintended consequences. Yeah. And it's clear that the unintended consequences were this huge level of distraction that I think Steve would, just not welcome.
I don't think so.
And wouldn't welcome from a design point of view either.
As difficult and hard-nosed and sort of all the reputation that he has as I read this book is all true. The evidence is all there. I do not think that this was meant to happen. I think this is an unintended consequence and just this thing lurking around a corner that he and his team could not see around when they made the first iPhone. And by the way, I'll get back to my knowing what you want question. I'd also make the case. I mean, the research on this, the distracted times piece, which I talk about on this show a lot. The research is in. This is no longer a sort of, we think maybe these are this Anxious Generation book by what's his name, David Haidt, Peter Haidt, whatever. Yep. He's awesome. He did The Coddling of the American Mind. He's a really, really interesting guy. I've read it. I mean, it's case closed. It is all because of the iPhones, and mostly within the iPhones, it's social media. And if we wonder why our kids are struggling and overprescribed and overmedicated, and our adults are largely the same and people can't focus, all this stuff, it is almost 100% attributed to these devices. So,
well, now we're going to riff on this too. Okay. So there's a couple of things I want to respond to. So first of all, when I wrote Essentialism, I wrote about the unholy alliance that was taking place between smartphones and social media, because really, of course, those were designed completely separately.
Totally.
And it's when you bring them together, you create, the last thing that device in our pockets is, a phone. Like we don't even know what it is, but it's not that. In my mind, it's something like a $3 trillion military-grade disorienting machine.
Correct.
Something like that. And in a sense, we're just no match for it. And individually, certainly not if we're living reactively to everything, because this stuff is so precisely attuned to whatever our particular distraction addiction happens to be. It's no secret that the social media companies have been hacking habits, right? Like one of my friends wrote the book Hooked that was utilized all through Silicon Valley. Like this was not even. No one's even pretending.
No, that's what I'm saying. No, nobody's like, it's case closed. You have the smartest engineers and designers, the smartest, best paid engineers, designers, psychologists, everyone in a team saying, how can we maximize eyeballs on app for the sake of advertising dollars? That's literally it. It's the whole model. So your point is you were early on this. You were, because the iPhone had only been out for 4 years at that point.
Well, I think the work that the data that's been gathered, that's been researched. I went to an early screening about that book before it was written, and the author was talking about the data, and it just was so reinforcing to the idea of the unholy alliance. It's not so much that I'm saying, I was first. It's just this. I think it's extremely powerful that we have the data now and that he's done the analysis of it. What he found, for example, is that, it hits everyone in society. Adolescent girls are the most directly hit, like really damaged. And then he even divides that up. And what you have is that of adolescent girls, those that are least damaged, they're all damaged, but least damaged are adolescent girls from conservative or religious homes. The next least, if you're an adolescent girl from a conservative, non-religious home.
Sure.
And then the most is if adolescent girl
liberal progressive home.
In a liberal progressive home. And I'm not making a political point. No. The data is the data.
100%. And that passes the eye test. Anyone who's out there in life right now paying attention would be corroborated and validated through their lived experience. You can see that very, very clearly. And it's not a political or religious point. Those are just that is just what we're seeing. So this is the perfect I'm glad that we did the tangents because this is the perfect setup. All that being what it is right now, and this is not, by the way, just only affecting teenage girls. This is affecting men in their 40s.
Those are just the ones that are like materially damaged and even traumatized.
They're getting it the worst, but it's affecting all of us. So tricky times right now. Knowing what you want for all of those reasons, distracted times, the media tells us what we should want. We're not I don't think, as self-aware or in tune with our spirit and our emotions as we once were. So the joke used to be, it's okay if you're 18 and you don't know what you want anymore. And now it's like, it's okay if you're 45 and you're still figuring it out. Like, you get what I mean? Like, this question, which should be obvious, is not. My what I'd love for you to maybe coach the audience on is like Greg's view on figuring out what you want in modern life.
Yeah, let me just support for a second what you're saying. There's a term for this. It's called mimetic desire. I think that's the term. And what that is that people pursue not what other people want, which of course would not be ideal anyway, but it's worse than that. It's that people pursue what they believe other people want.
Right.
So it's not even the same thing. It's not even that other people want it. If you believe it, of course, social media really produces that sensation. Everyone's just trying to figure out what everybody else wants so that they'll get lots of follows and likes and so on. So it's this really strange. It's a very strange desire echo chamber. Mm-hmm. It's an echo chamber in other ways too, but desires particularly are strange in there. You're trying to work out what they want. They're posting what they think you want. Everyone is in that mirrored room. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to suggest something that sounds really non-essentialist, and it's not at all, but it's sort of a misunderstanding of essentialism that makes it sound like this. And I learned it from Steve Harvey, the comedian, the TV personality, and entrepreneur. Besides that, so once a year he holds a camp for single moms and their at-risk teenage sons, hundreds of them. And I was invited to come and speak. I mean, I've known Steve for years now, and he's. Just as an aside, Essentialism is his favorite book. That is how we were first connected. So that's why I'm sort of how we. He says to everybody in the audience, which is all of the mothers, he said, "Let me tell you what your problem is. Your problem is," and I'm quoting almost verbatim him, the problem is you're not asking God for enough." Mm. He said, you ask God to help you pay the rent. Does he ever let you down? You always find a way. Something happens. Something works out. You're not asking for enough. He says, go home, start writing a list of 400 things you want. Actually, he corrects himself. He goes, well, that's going to be way too many for you. Go home to 150. But really, he means 400. He says, because what's going to happen, you're going to get to like 25 or 30 or something, and you're out. That is it. Like, you don't have anything else. You don't even know what you would want beyond it. There is a limit. And I went home and I started doing this. I got to about 65 within a fairly short period of time. And they were major things. Every one of them is big. This is not a commitment list. It's exploration. And that's how it fits into the essentialist model, because essentialism has three parts: explore what's essential, eliminate what's non-essential, and make it as effortless as possible to execute what matters most. So that's an ongoing process. You have to explore, and it's not unusual for people that hear about essentialism or read it to think, oh, it's all about elimination, which is only half right. You have to explore way more broadly than a non-essentialist. So you keep doing this. You just make the list. You get to 65 and 75. I think I'm up to about 100 now, and I'm not done. I will go all the way to 400 because every time I run out, I see a limit in my own thinking. That's the limit. That's it. I have not thought bigger than those things. Now, they're big enough. I assure you they are enormous. We could even just call them, it's like the impossible list or the limitless list. That's its point. That's its use. So then I can return to it. Even that's powerful. When I just read through the list, something goes from impossible to highly unlikely.
Right.
And then some point you go, wow, I mean, maybe there's a way. I mean, what might that look like? And then maybe you see an opportunity in your life and you can connect it. You're like, oh, well, that is how you would achieve that. Doesn't mean you have to do it, but now at least that's now you'd know that might be a path to achieving that impossible thing. So from that enormous list, right? List enormous. I'm then culling from that. Maybe let's say right now in my life, I have 10 things that are my major things, right? Like these are very carefully selected. These are weighing them up. They have to be a clear yes. Like if it's not a clear yes, it becomes a clear no, right? That's one of the essentialist ideas, but it's true. It's got to be a 10 out of 10, sort of feel like an 11 out of 10 sensation.
Yeah.
I really want that. That would be amazing. That would be a game changer. Or, there could be another criteria, might be like if on my deathbed test, right, like this would be devastating. Or if I take those 10 and I'll prioritize them. And the first sort of 4 or 5 of them will be those kinds of death test things that won't come into my email today. They won't come along in that way, but they're like, a truly, deeply, securely attached marriage, right? And we just celebrated 24 years, right? So we're on our way, and it's a great marriage and a great relationship. But of course, you have to keep investing. And the idea that I could get to the end of my life and do all these other great things and not have that, to me, that would be a disaster. And so on. So I'm curating this list down. Those things are then, those become really central then in trying to organize my life. And it takes innovation too, because, at first I don't know how to do those things. There are things on that list even now, I just don't know how to do them. But they're the goals for the next couple of years.
There's so much here I want to dig into. Okay, so I learned a little hack this year on this question, which I want to share with the audience because it worked for me. There are a lot of people who, when you ask them what they want, they either don't know, they'll make it up on the spot, or they'll tell you what they think they deserve. And those are all of those are the wrong answer. However, if you ask them, what do you not want? Almost everyone can answer that question. So there's so it's very simple. If you don't know what you want, spend a second thinking about what you don't want. And then it's just the inverse of that. So for me, I don't want to be like sort of middle-aged and unhealthy and broken down in my body. So the opposite of that is being fit for life and being vital for life and aging gracefully. I, Benji, don't want to divorce with a family. So so the opposite of that is what you said, a really healthy, engaged marriage. And that's a goal of mine that I'm working towards. I don't want to be really, really stressed out financially. That looks like a very arduous and difficult life. So the opposite of that is some form of abundance. I don't need to be a cajillionaire, but I definitely don't want to be really, really struggling the whole way. And you can very quickly see how this list becomes quite long. So if you're struggling with the what do you want question, start on the what you don't want and just reverse it. The second thing I want to say that I'm just picking up on in the conversation.
Should we riff on that for a second?
Sure.
Or do you just want to get your list out?
Well, let me get my list out. Because there might be something juicy here you want to talk about. There's a very clear pattern that you are communicating here. The common denominator is writing, the verb of writing. Jordan Peterson, polarizing figure, don't care. I'm a huge fan. If you don't like him, read his stuff and then come back to me and tell me that you still don't like him. Is very, very clear on this. And he says it all the time. I love how clean this thought is. He says, if you can't write, you can't think.
Yeah, I love that.
And
he says it about speaking too. If you can't speak, you can't think.
It's so true. And I would go so far as in business, I don't really trust people who aren't writers. And they don't need to have books, by the way, but they need to have notes. Their Apple Notes should have at least 200 entries, and they should be scribbling stuff all the time, digitally, physically. That's a green light for me when I see that. Because what I notice with non-writers is that their thinking is unhygienic. And I like that word. It's not clean. It's dirty. So you'll get halfway through a thought and then it trails off into I haven't finished the thought. Another term, more maybe slang, would be it's half-baked. And you can tell when someone is half-baked in the way that they speak. And I can tell you with 100% certainty there's a very linear path between their non-writing activities and their half-baked thinking, their unhygienic thinking. And so look, when in doubt on this, what do you want question, ask yourself what you don't want and start writing about it. I guarantee you within a month, you're going to have a very, 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 you will have made significant progress on this question. Go ahead and riff.
Okay, come back to your first point about what you don't want. So Socrates was described by the empress of the time as the wisest man in the world. And he's recorded as having responded to that by saying, I don't know if I'm the wisest man in the world, but if I am, it's because I have a daemon with me always. And the daemon never tells me what to do, but always tells me what not to do.
What's a daemon? Is that a journal?
Well, no, it doesn't have a precise equivalent in our modern language. So it's spelt almost the same as demon, but it's not a demon in the way we would normally describe it. So it's some kind of, it's some spirit, entity that was with him. Yeah. And I really relate to this. I mean, this idea of like, if the daemon ever says, do not do this, right? Like that alone is a huge part of that reorienting process you need in the plane metaphor. Mm-hmm. I was stuck in Storm Ida one time, stuck at the airport, massive, water's coming in through the ceilings, people are losing their minds. And I think, okay, listen, I'm just going to get to the airport. If I can see the airport from here, I've stayed in it before, it's 10 minutes from here. If I can just get there, I'll stay there for the night, I'll avoid all this calamity. And as I'm going, I keep trying like quite diligently to get there. And every option is not working because the storm is just out of control. And then finally someone says, listen, you could just walk there, right? Like it's down here. The rain didn't look so bad all of a sudden. And I start walking and I don't know how else to describe it, but a daemon says, do not do this. Yeah. And I carried on walking for another literally 4 paces, even louder. And I was like, okay, I'm going back, and I retrace all my steps and everything, works out. It's a longer night, but it works out just fine. That orientation, I think is exactly right. So that's the riff on that.
And do you have any thoughts on the writing piece and how that really assists to clean up your thinking?
Well, you mentioned Steve before, right? And Steve Jobs. And one of the things I've worked with Apple for years, and I read, of course, the Isaacson's biography, but there's a better biography, by the way, about Steve Jobs. It's called Becoming Steve Jobs. And one of the reasons it's better is because more of the people who were closer to Steve participated in the writing of Becoming Steve Jobs. So that's one of the reasons it's better. But they also ask a better question, which is, how is it possible that this brusque, crazy entrepreneur, startup guy that gets fired from his own company goes on to lead the greatest renaissance of the decade, maybe of the century. And their argument is that he doesn't. What happens is that in the 10 years he's gone from Apple, he's over at Pixar, he's being trained, he gets married, he has a family, he's a different leader by the time he comes back. Now, of course, he's not 100% transformed. None of us are in a 10-year period, but he's materially, seriously better at leading and building teams and creating dialogue and disagreement in productive ways. And so he really transforms in that journey. But the media never was willing to, they didn't even double click on it. So as soon as he's back, they're like, okay, well, what's the jerk done today? Everything was seen through an out-of-date lens. Well, one of the things Steve said that has really stood with me is that he was frustrated by his thinking, his own thinking. He was frustrated in the same way, like I'm training for an Ironman right now, right? And so I can sense my limits all the time. And in the same way as one can feel a sort of frustration at that limit in physical terms, he was frustrated in the same way in mental terms. Mm-hmm. And so he was constantly trying to upgrade the OS system of his mind. And I relate to that completely. I'm inadvertently doing a doctorate at the University of Cambridge right now, and I'm trying to work through a great reading list because I have read, and I don't feel embarrassed about my own writing and reading and thought development. Well, I say that, and yet in one sense, I still actually 2 or 3 years ago woke up and I kind of was not embarrassed, like, oh, I'm in conversation and I can't navigate it, or I'm not learning. I was learning, but I just sort of felt appalled at everything I didn't know. And I was like, okay, well, let's go to do something about this. There's so much to learn. Let's learn the best of what everybody else knows. And so that's been a sort of 2 or 3 year journey right now. And of course, it's not over, and it's presumably never over. Okay. So this is all about the development of your mind. Now, you come to writing, which is, of course, what your real specific question was about. Writing is just writing is sort of the miserable experience of seeing the noise in your own head. That's what it is. And it's the miserable part of it is it's so messy.
Yeah.
You can hardly believe it.
The miserable part is that most of it's bad. It's like,
of course it's bad. Yes, right. That's right.
Like
that's a great way of saying it.
It's a musician. Most of the tunes they pluck, most of the guitar riffs they come up with are bad. Nobody sees the cutting room floor of your favorite band. You just see the albums. You just see the hits. But it's a tip of the iceberg type metaphor. There's so much more crap that they put out and have to look at and go, this is crap, delete, folder away, and no one's ever going to see this. But that is the experience I think you're hinting at.
Seinfeld, this is a Seinfeld idea, right? Like, so he writes every single day. That's his big thing. And that's all he thinks he really does. Like that's the work. And then he did a documentary, I don't know, many years ago now, 15, 20 years ago, where he showed in the documentary the first stand-up of new material, including people heckling him and booing him because none of it's any good. There might be one single joke in that will make it through to the next round. And of course, it will have to be adapted as well. And so he just kept on, the whole documentary is the process from that first attempt all the way to the last attempt where everyone's like, this guy's a genius. Everything's hilarious. He's brilliant. It's like, well, yes, he is. But the brilliance is the willingness to write, try it until you are culling so much material, you're left with the diamonds.
Yeah.
You're left with, in that sense, the vital few.
Yeah.
And just connecting the dots, I think, with all of this here, I just had a friend of mine on my podcast. He wrote a book called Idea Flow. Jeremy Utley, a friend of mine from D School at Stanford, and we were riffing on this quote from Steve Jobs, right? The one we all know, one of his most famous statements. You have to say no, you have to say no to a thousand ideas to say yes to one, right? And it's all about what we all hear, including me, for years was, oh, you got to say no a lot. But when I was talking with Jeremy, I said to him, look, there's a second piece to this, isn't there? That we none of us are looking at. It's like you have to have 999 ideas to say no to.
Mm-hmm.
Like you have to generate an enormous number of ideas to be able to find one absolute, diamond. And so it's that combination. It's knowing that you're looking for a diamond that is worth the 1,000 ideas to get there, because it will be so disproportionately important and valuable once you have it. A quote I read years ago said, you just need one right idea to live like a king for the rest of your life. I read it when I was like a young teenager. It just grabbed my attention. I'm like, wow, let's find that idea. Let's like look for that. We find that one thing, it makes everything different. And so it's this combination of, can I go through enough stuff and can I find the gem? Now, in my own writing, my actual, there's the daily planning process. That's a form of not forced writing, but it's sort of a certain kind of writing. Then I have formal writing, right, where I'm writing articles or I'm writing a new book now. I have been for the last couple of years. You're doing the same thing.
Yeah. And
I was just saying to my wife, I said to her, if someone asks me, I said, if this next book is successful, I said, if it's really successful, especially, and someone says, look, I'd like to write a book like that. How do you do it? I said, I will never be able to answer that question. Mm-hmm. That was the sensation I had in the time. And that's because it is almost unthinkable the number of times I have rewritten, in this case, the introduction. That's what I've been working on again. And I don't even know for sure whether the iterations, like it's not obvious on a given day whether that latest 3 iterations are in fact better than what it was before. But I believe that in the process of doing it, I will, one by one, word by word, that's a better phrase. So you had 50 other phrases and all of them are gone and no one will ever know, but now you have a good one. And eventually those all put together. I mean, this is the vision. Certainly this is what happened with Essentialism, was a similar kind of process.
Well, and I think the same exercise can be applied to designing a life that you want, going back to this original question.
Yeah,
I think a lot of contractors tell themselves a story because their businesses are blue collar. I know there's some research on this recently. A lot of people in these industries are sort of, there's a higher rate of neurodivergence,
I hear you.
ADD, dyslexia, et cetera, et cetera. I think that there's a bit of a narrative, a story that a lot of our listeners would tell themselves that I'm not a good writer, so I'm never going to bother. Look, I'm not telling you to go write a book. I'm telling you to go and write a painted picture for your life 3 years from now or 5 years from now. Or if you're really, really good, maybe you can do one further out in the future. But with the rate of change in the world right now, I think that's unlikely. I did this for myself literally this year. And it's not, I've said this before. We had Cameron Harold on the show, the guy who wrote Vivid Vision in the first place. And we talked about this. That's why I did it. And so my audience is familiar with this framework, but I just would sort of back up the idea of, in order to have an essentialist life, you do need to know what you want in the first place so that you can navigate towards it. You do need to have the destination for that plain metaphor to work. And if you don't, you are lost forever. And if you're trying to get that destination or that vivid vision figured out, it's never going to hurt to write. You don't need to publish it. It's just for you. and start with what you don't want and work backwards from there. And I think that though for me, that has dramatically changed the way that I think and the way that I get up in the morning, because I do often go back to it and I reread it, and it's not cemented in. It's a Google Doc, right? We can edit it. I can backspace. I can get rid of a paragraph if something changes. Relationship goes this way, career goes that way. You can edit it, but having an organizing principle for the way that I make decisions and the way that I try to track towards something has really, I'm not even making the case that it's good for productivity. I'm saying it's good for my mental health. It's literally made me a happier person when I wake up in the morning. I'm much calmer. I feel, it's not perfect, but it's a way better recipe for my kind of system.
You have the vision, because I have
that
vision.
vision. Yes. It's just really, really helped me feel a sense of sort of spiritual calmness inside me to do that. And it wasn't easy. It's probably taken me 20 hours of writing. Did a first draft, and then you kind of add chapters, and I organize it by sections. I know what my spiritual life will be like. I know what I want my financial life, my work life, my marriage, my kids, my house, all of it. It's all there. Some of it's really deep and meaningful. Some of it's kind of corny, but it's been a really, really helpful exercise for me. And I want to actually sort of use this to segue into something that you've mentioned a bunch, is the idea of saying no. In order to do that, you have to defend with the word no a lot. And our listeners are fundamentally yes people. That's why they're entrepreneurs. That's why they're contractors. They're solution oriented. They want to help their customers. They want to help their team. What have you found for yes people? What have you found to be a very practical way to get better at saying no when we need to?
I think the best thing to do is to create a pause of some kind. There's all sorts of other things you can do. You could become a better negotiator. You can do all sorts of things. But I think the idea of pause, like this, that sounds so cool, so interesting. Let me just check my calendar and get back to you. This is just not committing right then in that moment when you are only capable of evaluating the opportunity or the request in a vacuum.
Right.
Like you can only say, well, is this a good thing, a basically good thing, or is this a basically bad thing? Well, it's a basically good thing. Okay, so we'll do it. Or you could do the other mistake. If you're very risk averse, you might say the opposite. Oh, no, I'm not going to do stuff just because I just don't know yet.
Right.
But I think if you're saying that people have a challenge on that listen to this, it's a good thing. Okay, I need to do good things. So there are other ways to pause too. Even in a hierarchical situation, if you're answering to somebody, you can say, "Oh, just tell me, like, when do you need this? Who's it for? Why are we doing it? Let me just ask you a few questions. Is that okay? I just want to make sure I understand."
Yeah.
Because then you can
save yourself a lot of time. You can save yourself an unbelievable amount of time by asking people who ask you to do things why.
Yeah. Why are we doing it?
Why are we doing this? What's the goal here? Yeah.
I'll give you an example of this. There's so in addition to Essentialism, I also wrote Effortless, which is also a New York Times bestseller. And one of the people that I coached in Effortless was the kind of person who was like staying up till 4 a.m. in the morning, photoshopping for like this youth group the next day. Like no one's asking you to do this. She's a manager at a university, right? And she's in charge of their videography group. So she's doing video and all sorts of other things as well.
She was just going above and beyond. That's kind of what you're saying. Doing too much. Yeah.
Always over.
Yeah.
Always over. The insecure overachiever. So she says, I feel guilty if I even eat lunch because that's a little less that I could be doing. You know, this is the logic, and it's not super great logic. And that's what I tried to increase her awareness of was the way she was thinking. And because she didn't notice that, she just is immediately trying to do more than is being asked every time. So I said, well, the next time that somebody asks you to do something, I just want you to start by noticing the mental reaction you have. What thought comes to your mind? Next day, she gets a call from a professor at the university who says, listen, I want you to come and video my class for the semester. And immediately her first thought is, oh, I'm going to wow him. And connected to that thought, what she means by wowing him is, I'll get the whole team there for every class for 4 months. We'll cut and splice it together so we have multiple camera angles. We'll make sure that the audio is superb. We'll put music in the beginning and at the end, just kind of bring it in. We'll slice his slides into it. This is all what she means by wow him. And then she remembers the coaching. Look, just pause. Look at how you're thinking about it and ask a couple of questions. Look, why are we trying to do this? Mm-hmm. What's it really about? Challenge the requirements, as Musk would say. Challenge the dumb requirements. And so as she asks that question, he says, oh, well, it's just for one student who's going to miss a few classes because he has an athletic commitment. And she's like, well, maybe you could just have someone use a phone and record, the audio and send it to him. Mm-hmm. And the professor's like, oh, yeah, I hadn't even thought about that. That's way better. That's way easier than having your team come and all the rest of it.
Right.
She hangs up the phone. This is 10 minutes that saved 4 months for a whole team of people. She cannot believe this moment. She is genuinely shocked because in previous cycles, she wouldn't have discovered it. She could have done that 4 months and never discovered it. Because if you never ask why, you just deliver the thing and you deliver it with bells on, whistles, and nobody wanted it. Mm-hmm. You didn't work out what they wanted. There's not knowing what you want, but not knowing what they want or why they want it, so that you can get back to purpose and then shred this over exertion, over thinking, over engineering, over delivering, over execution. All of that stuff burns us out before we get to the next level.
All of the good decisions that I have made as a leader with my small team here at BTA have been removals of things. They haven't been additions. They've actually all been things that we've taken away. We're doing this and it doesn't drive an ROI. This is essentially waste. Snip. So it's always a scissor cut. Like those are 9 times out of 10. Like those are the big plays versus this amazing thing that you kind of design and add and implement. It's usually just getting rid of stuff as have been the real flow makers and bottleneck relievers. I want to transition to one question I had for you before we close, which is related to saying no, but more explicitly, Greg, you're a big proponent in the stuff that you write about. I see this come up a lot. I'll use the 3 words that I see you use. You're a big proponent of rest, play, and escape. And I think that in this modern 10X guru, grind set, hustle, LinkedIn influencer culture, thoughtosphere that we live in today, I personally find that very refreshing. Yeah. Now, my dad has this great saying, and I love it. You may have heard it before. You can't be so heavenly bound. You're so earthly good. You can't spend so much time meditating and recuperating and channeling the woo-woo energy that you don't build a life. So you got to take it in small doses, and it's got to be timed well. But where do these 3 things, rest, play, and escape, kind of fit into your overall philosophy?
Yeah, let me take one piece of that, right? Let me just take the rest and let me try to answer it with a story, a case study I came across that I just blew my mind. And illustrates what you just said about, kind of all wisdom is about tension, right? It's between rest and work. If you work too much, that's not wisdom. If you rest too much, that's not wisdom. Like, it's about the tension between these things. So go back with me to the 1850s, when what had captured the world's imagination was who would get to the South Pole first. So this is the equivalent of going to Mars today or the moon shot in the 60s, because no one in all of recorded history had ever done it. Shackleton famously, his team of people have read about him and learned about him. They didn't get there. And it's sort of this amazing story of people that failed but then still survived because it's so life and death, right? It's the most arduous physical challenge known to to humanity at the time. 2 teams set off on the same day. This is just the next set of people trying to do it. Different locations, but same day. The first is a British team led by an expedition leader who has as a mental model something like this: maximum effort equals maximum results. And I mean, like most insecure overachievers are like, yeah, that has to be true. That sounds right. If you push harder, you get better results. And of course, it is true to a certain point. And so how he translated that was this. He's like, okay, well, day one, we're going to go 30, 40, or even 50 miles if we can, because we are going to try and beat this other team. And if we go further, faster, we will get there sooner. And that happens day one, day two, day three. And then they have a really terrible bad weather day. And they try to make progress, but they can't because they're burned out. They're physically exhausted. And so then they go set up camps. They're inside these camps, physically exhausted and now also emotionally exhausted because they're not making any progress. And nothing drains us more than not making meaningful progress. I mean, that is itself very costly. And they're writing in their journals, oh, we have the worst weather, the worst luck of anyone who's ever tried to get to the South Pole. And they're wrong about that. They had better weather than they themselves had been anticipating, but it felt true because of their approach. Okay, they wrote in their journals, could any team make progress in weather like this? We don't think anyone could, but one team could, and that's the Norwegian team, who had a different mental model. Theirs was something like, look, optimal effort will equal maximum results. And they learned that idea. Now, that's my expression, but the idea behind it, they learned from the people living in Antarctica at the time, who explained to him, look, if you want to survive in these extreme conditions, it's all about sweat management. If you push too hard, then you'll freeze, you'll make less progress, you'll burn your body out, or you'll die. So he takes that and translates all of this, that mindset and the advice they gave, into a single rule. 15 miles a day. That's what seemed to be optimal. Day 1, 15. Day 2, day 3. Now the bad weather day hits them too. What do? Well, they have enough with which to do another 15. So they don't have the emotional burnout or the physical burnout. So they just keep going, consistent. The plot thickens when they get within 45 miles of the South Pole. They have perfect weather, perfect flat sledding conditions. If they break the rule this one time, they can make it to the South Pole in one day. And to complicate matters further, they don't know where the British team is. For all they know, that team is ahead of them. So the question just for a moment is like, what do you do? Do you push? Do you pause? I mean, I just this week was working with 150 executives, and I asked the whole audience that question. So 85% said, okay, we'd push, myself included.
Right.
And I know how the story ends, but it's so deeply baked in us that more is better. The pushing harder is better. More effort will equal more results. Well, they don't push, they still pace, which is amazing to me. It takes them 3 days to do that 45 miles, again, averaging 15 miles a day. They get to the South Pole. They are the first there. They've beaten the British team by more than 20 days.
Wow.
It's impossible. It's not what should happen. It's not what we believe, because we've been conned into a sort of, let's say, a bad 1980s motivational speaker / coach who has taught the idea 150% effort. That's how you win. And it's like, well, I mean, I don't even think it works at elite level sports in any field. That's just what people thought worked 25 years ago, 35 years ago. It isn't what works now. I've interviewed elite athletes now and elite coaches of athletes who speak, for example, about running fast, not hard. And there's so many other examples, but that's just one illustration. Let me just come back to this case study for one more minute, because the British team also arrives late, exhausted, burned out mentally, physically, emotionally. Not one of them make it home alive.
Right. They die on the way back.
They're on the way back.
Yeah.
The Norwegian team makes it the 16,000-mile journey back. Mm-hmm. When I read the biography, I was knocked almost off my chair when I heard this summary. I was reading this for Effortless, when I was writing Effortless and researching Effortless. He said, the Norwegian team made progress, his exact words, without particular effort. Well, I don't know what you can make about that. That's an absurd thing to write. It's just mad. it's the most arduous physical challenge they could even imagine. So how can you say that? It killed the other team. How can you say it? But there was something about the approach, right? Colloquially, we might call it the 85% rule, that there's something extremely resilient and optimal about figuring out your maximum and going a little less than the maximum. 100% is your maximum. A little less allows you to go a lot further, a lot faster. So to me, this is an illustration of the rest principle. I mean, you could apply rest in lots of ways, but to me, that's one idea that high performers, people who want to get to the next level in their life, in their business, really can come to.
So I think that story underscores a very clear approach to success, which is sort of get rich slow. Like take your time. Another quote I've heard is the reason you feel behind is because you're in a rush. Like big plays don't happen overnight. So I think we kind of get this, but just to really underscore the point, and this feels like a really natural place to bring it in for landing. We're recording this at middle of December. We have this scheduled to come out kind of in the first week of January. So it's the start of 2025 as people are listening to this. With that story that you just told, what's kind of like the closing advice for and I want to be clear, these listeners are hungry. They want to build, they're systems thinking, they're into hiring a team. They don't want to be average lawn mowing company XYZ. They want to do something great. What is your advice, your mantra, your closing thoughts for someone to take into 2025 and beyond?
The word that is most on my mind right now is limitless. And for a lot of reasons, but in the new writing and research I've been working on, I sort of think about a natural maturation process from the locked to the limited to the limitless. And that can operate on all sorts of levels. It's a mindset first, but it's also, an action set, a set of behaviors. It's a set of results. And people who are locked are the people who they don't even know their mind is thinking. They don't know that their mind is seeing. They are just in it, like prisoners. But not known, they don't know they're prisoners. That's precisely what makes them prisoners. It's the worst kind of prison to be in.
Right.
That's the worst kind, is if you're in a prison and you don't even know it. And so if you become aware of it, if you can escape to become the observer, then, let's say of your own mind, even though that's not the only thing you want to observe, you almost immediately become limited, which is an improvement, because you start to see your limits. You go, oh, well, my goodness, I think like that. I see it like this. Like the person I was mentioning from Effortless, the coachee, who suddenly discovers, oh, I'm trying to wow everyone all the time. Like, just noticing is an advantage. But then there's a whole nother gear, because it's beyond even like the growth mindset. Work by Carol Dweck, who I've known for many years, and it's just a superb work. It's beyond like even that kind of mindset, because that's a mindset about one particular thing that you say, look, can your intelligence grow? Yes, it can grow. And if you know that, it's a huge advantage. But the limitless mindset is like the growth mindset squared, because it's the belief that you can upgrade your mindsets. It's like a meta growth mindset. Mm-hmm. Like, hey, you don't just get more intelligent. You can upgrade all of the ways of your thinking, and that's the maturity continuum that I'm describing: locked, limited, limitless, as it applies to mindset. But of course, it goes beyond that. And so I think that's what I would say. It's like, don't be locked. And if they're listening to this, that's already a step in the right direction. Although it's not exactly the same, because you still have to not just react to what you're hearing when they're watching or listening to your podcast. They have to actually go, oh, well, what is my existing thought process? How am I seeing it? Yes, write about it. What you write about when you free write, that's what's in your head. That's what you've got right now. Notice, how about this? Notice when you're listening to someone you disagree with, that's what's in your head. All of that reaction that's inside of you, all of that obstinance, that's what's in your head. And I'm not saying that's wrong, but you got to be observant to it. And because then, my goodness, think of what you can unlock once you start to become aware of the limited thinking that you have. And all of us are limited in our thinking. Most of us get most of our mindset from family of origin and high school. So that's it. Now, family of origin could be limited in 1,000 different ways. Some people listening or watching this, some people know exactly what I'm talking about. It was very hard life, and limited in so many ways that they had to slowly figure out and make sense of. You go back and read Hillbilly Elegy, and of course now, right, he's going to be the vice president in the U.S. But before anyone got polarized about any of that, he was a hero to left and right because that story speaks for itself.
This is J.D. Vance's book?
Yes.
I've not read it, but I've heard it's amazing.
You have to, you have to read it.
Yeah.
You cannot believe it. If you read that now, it'll be a very interesting experience for you because you'll be reading him post him becoming vice president of the United States.
Context, yeah.
And that will be very strange because when I read it, like there was he expressed no political ambition. There was no sense of that. The fact that he was at Yale, that he'd gone to Yale Law School, was impossible given his story. So that was enough of an American dream story to believe it. The idea that he's now going to be vice president, and therefore, let's say something like 50-50 on becoming president one day is just unfathomable. But it's the story of someone who starts to become aware of their thinking and their limits of it. And whether it's Steve Jobs discovering his limits or it's a conversation we've had today about it, or it's J.D. Vance, once you start to discover that, let me say the final point on this little metaphor. You said earlier, the people that you're encouraging everyone to write. Mm-hmm. And you're saying, look, a lot of people watching this, listening to this will say, I'm not a good writer, And it's like, that might be true, but why do you think it?
Because they've been
told it. Where
did
you learn that?
Yeah, because they've been told it.
Because, this is what it is. Honest to goodness. Let's say the highest three priorities of school should be, or still are, to help somebody love reading, love writing, love learning. Surely, that is what one should come out with, so that you can carry on doing that all the way through your life. And that's exactly what people don't come away with. They come out thinking learning is boring and that they can't do it because they're not very smart. They learn that they can't write and they don't want to read anymore. It's like the exact opposite of what they should come away with. And you can do something about that. You don't have to be limited to that. You can just listen to audiobooks of the greatest books that have ever been written. You can write rubbish in a journal, just getting the ideas out. Use the planner, the Essentialism planner, or something else. And so it's just the discovery that those limits have been placed upon us without really anyone intending it, or without us even realizing it. Mm-hmm. So we're just living in that limited world going forward. It's like there's a lot that can be done beyond that.
Yeah, I can think of a good analogy. If you have ever, I grew up with horses. My mom had horses. You can picture a horse kind of pacing in a paddock. The gate's not locked. It's totally open. If they bumped their nose against it, the gate would open and it would be free run. It's just they never even bother to bump their nose against it to realize that there's actually this whole other world out there. So, however you want to picture that idea visually in your mind, I think that this idea of limitless thinking, going from locked to limited to limitless, is a really great place to close. Greg, I love this conversation. Philosophical, fun, and love all your work. Thank you so much for coming on. For those of you listening, I'm going to link the planner. I want you guys to check it out. It's the start of a new year. I want people to get focused going into 2025 and beyond. And this is a great tool to help you do that. Greg, thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure.
Cheers. Thanks so much for watching this episode of Contractor Evolution. If you've already subscribed to our channel, consider sharing this episode with another contractor who you think needs to hear it.